Welcome to the Global Tech Leaders Podcast, where we help business leaders and individual contributors with actionable insights to hit their number and figure out the nuances of truly operating a business globally today, squeezing the essence of the lessons learned from the planet's top tech leaders. This is your guide to joining the fast track to global market scaling.
Welcome to today's podcast. We're joined by Alan Temple, who is the global head of sales at Quark Software. Alan had the great accolade of being my first boss back in the day in Dell. He's somebody that I've always lent on for feedback, advice, direction in the marketplace, etc. He's got a very good steer on talent management, sales operations and forecasting in particular, and really getting that formulaic mix in the model to yield the results you need. So welcome, Alan, to today's podcast.
Thanks, guys.
So I suppose just to dive right in today in what we're looking to talk about, take us through your own career. What's led you to the point that you're at Global Head of Sales, and what were the steps you took along the journey to get there, maybe some of the ups, the downs, and everything in between?
Yeah, sure. I think anybody who doesn't go to university for the very specific degrees, engineering, doctor, that sense, I did business and finance, doesn't necessarily know what they're going to do. And I was quite lucky to essentially fall into something that I enjoyed. So back in the late 90s, I would have come out of college. My local hometown, the biggest employer in that hometown was Dell Computers. Mm-hmm. I'd done a quick stint with them for a couple of months in their customer care departments on breaks from college. And I went in there essentially selling PCs. This was back in the day when the only PC sellers really in the world were Dell, HP, and I can't think of the other one.
Gateway went under, I guess.
Gateway, that's with the cow. I was trying to get the one with the cow as their emblem, and it was really Dell v Gateway, and that's really where Dublin started off as an IT hub. It was Dell, it was Microsoft, it was Gateway, and sure. I went to Dell. I started off in part-time sales. I remember specifically it was a $40,000 a week target, and we used to work so hard on a Saturday and Sunday. We'd have our week done before the week even started on it. It was an unbelievable sales training, as you know yourself, Ross. Dell is a little like no other. My comparison to it sometimes is a little bit like the Shawshank Redemption. When you leave it, you've got to readjust yourself to the real world. And in short, every Friday in Dell was the end of a financial year. In other companies, it was that driven and that demanding, and you essentially sank or swam in there. So I learned a massive amount. I got lucky. I was the best rep on a team with no manager, and got promoted to manager with really nothing to lean on in leadership skills bar sport. And I did pretty much every leadership role within Dell over that 10-year period, at which point Dell probably became a little bit complacent. Their original thing was that they were just-in-time production, they had lower costs, and they kind of got lazy and got caught up on by companies like Acer and Lenovo and things like that. Dell had started to outsource to India. A lot of the roles or the career path that I would have went from essentially first-line manager up gone, and then with 10 years experience, I got the chance to take a redundancy, of which I took it. And this was in 2008, 2009, and I remember specifically I took redundancy. I took 2 months off. I needed surgery on my arm. I took 2 months off, and by the time my arm was working again, we were in the middle of the massive global downturn. So it wasn't an ideal time to take it. Mm. What I did was I looked at my CV. I said, what have I not done? And that was selling, presenting to directors, sales, field sales type of thing. So I took a role selling health insurance in Aviva Healthcare. So I did that role for a year, which I did learn an awful lot from, but I really missed the people management side of things on it. And then I went to Oracle to head up their business development division, which was actually key for me in my career because Dell never did business development.
Right.
And I've seen a lot of leaders come out of Dell with no understanding of business development. Dell just didn't need to do it. They either rang ads, the customers rang in, or their business sales guys just called out. There was no business development as such. So I learned everything I needed to know about business development. My background is very much, I was probably all set to be an accountant in life till I realized that it was quite a boring and dull job. So I'm very statistically and numbers orientated, and that really helped me in the role in Oracle. And one of probably the key learnings that I would give to anybody stepping into leadership role is no matter where I worked and no matter what their CRM system was, I became the best person at using it. If you can't use and manipulate your CRM system to pull the reports that you need, to make the arguments that you need, to look at your forecast, you really are stunted as a leader. And it's probably been the biggest strength I've had in my leadership. And it's led to me being the best at forecasting, the best at expanding, and strong at being able to look overall at numbers on it. So that's gave me a great time there in Oracle. I was with Oracle for 2 years there. I grew a team from 1 to 35. I learned so much about recruitment, mass recruitment, onboarding specifically. Oracle onboard very well. They do that standard where it's a week of Sandler sales technique, a week of product, and then a week of role play. People really come out if they're ready to go, which a lot of other companies don't do well. I was with them for 2 years, and then I was headhunted to LinkedIn, where I ran their talent solutions business for 4 years for UK and Ireland. And it was very much, I was purely focused on new business. I wasn't retaining the customers. We were selling to customers. We were managing our onboarding for 30 days, and we were handing them over to relationship managers. So it was pure new business sales. We went 100% year-on-year growth for 3 years in a row. With expansion of reps from 3 reps to 9 reps to 20 reps to 25 reps. So it really expanded massively to the point where we had to grow our relationship management side massively in order to manage the amount of customers that we had. Now, we were lucky, and I think people who don't think that luck plays a part in their career are solely wrong. We were lucky. Ireland was on the upturn, the economy was on the upturn, and the recruitment business obviously manages, as Ross, you'd know well, manages far better during the global upturn than the global downturn.
Well, I think there's a key point there to be made. I'm a big believer in that the harder you work, the luckier you get. And in addition to that, I would also say that fortune favors the prepared mind. There are plenty of opportunities that present themselves to everyone out there, not necessarily completely equally, but they're there, and it's those who seize them and in fact are ready to, pursue them, I think, are the ones that succeed ultimately. I think you've made a couple of key points there as well. I'd very much like to dive into. You also mentioned there around data. I think that's probably, from what I know of you, your kind of superpower. And from my own experience, I mean, one of my leaders once said to me, "In God we trust, all others bring data." And I think from a rep perspective, I would argue, and you've probably seen this as we both did in Dell, Alan, certainly on the transactional business side, as what was known as BSTT back then, is the best reps there were the most organized reps. And I would argue that's nearly 80% of the job is being really organized and together. The 20% is your sales ability, and you have to have that, but that can be taught. So maybe just let's dive into some of those things, and how that has allowed you to get into your current job. And you're talking about growing 100% year on year, which is phenomenal, which is more than Dell ever did. I think their top was like 60%. But you've got a lot of challenges to manage in that. You probably onboard too quickly, you hire wrong, etc. But maybe talk to us a little bit through that and some of the challenges you had around those specific instances with reps and being prepared and how they manage their data, etc. If you would.
Yeah, I think in one sense I was quite lucky that I didn't have to deal with the biggest challenge Dell had at the time, which was customer retention. I mean, when you bring a massive amount of customers on board really quickly, your churn or your loss rate does go up. And I know LinkedIn did struggle with that at the time. And that, unfortunately for me, wasn't necessarily my role on it. My role was just to keep growing and keep bringing in new business. But for a company in general, they've got to think about How did they continue to give a world-class customer experience? How did they onboard them correctly? How did they ensure that the solution becomes part of the company's muscle memory in those first couple of months? LinkedIn is a little bit like Excel formulas and things like that. If you don't learn something quickly and use it, you're going to forget about it quickly. And it's the same with companies that take on board LinkedIn Talent Solutions. If they don't start using it and incorporating it into their daily lives quickly, they never will. And we did have that challenge on it. The other challenge I had was reps were being promoted very, very quickly, on a fastly driven, and this was the same in Dell as well, that, reps were probably getting promotions that, to be honest, they probably didn't deserve. Sometimes you get a promotion that you're a little bit early to get, and sometimes you're waiting a long time for a promotion. Very rarely does a promotion come along just when you're ready for it. It's usually one of the other two extremes. And where that brings a problem is that it's all well and good where everybody's getting promotions and pay rise and grade changes within the first, every 9 months or 6 or 9 months. It's when that stops, that's where it becomes a problem. And keeping staff happy and retained and focused on the role when they may not have got a promotion, when it's actually become the norm or what they've become used to. Especially when you have people that it might be their first job, they might think that this is the norm, and it's not. So managing expectations of people when things slow down is a huge factor on it as well.
I'm glad you mentioned that, actually, because it's a huge topic for debate over here at Single Focus, right, in terms of the expectations of, kind of your BDO or SDO or LDO or whatever you want to call them, right? That, the mentality kind of used to be that, we'll just call from lists, we'll do this, we'll get promoted very quickly, and we move through the organization. So that expectation is set for people coming into an organization, whereas the reality of it is that, that business development kind of new business piece is really difficult, right? And there needs to be an investment. We estimate, right, a minimum investment of 18 months for somebody to be in that role to really, really nail it and be excellent at the role. And we feel there's an expectation that people want to be out of that role in 6 months' time. And that is just not possible in today's buying environment, because it's more complex, people expect more. And, like I said, it's not like the old BDO role where you just call in from lists and you're making appointments. And, there's an awful lot more to it, right, in terms of kind of being able to help people with that customer experience as well,
and it's actually can be really damaging for a company. Let me give you a quick example. First of all, back to data. I did the analysis on this in Oracle on maybe 50 or 60 BDRs, and what we found is that they only started giving return on investment for themselves and their training, their salary, their equipment, all those things after 5 months. So it was 5 months before they were really up to speed and really started to give a return on investment on the pipeline that they were creating. They then have a shelf life, a sweet spot, as you call it, from 5 months to somewhere between 15 and 18 months, depending on the organization. And that's the challenge that a lot of organizations have, is holding them in that role for that time and not letting them jump to sales. Now, what happens if they jump to sales is they may become good salespeople at the start, but they will still lack a sales maturity that can hurt them down the line on it. A BDO will probably do better in inside sales in the first 6 months than an external hire will be, because they know the company and they know the processes. But the company needs to get that return on investment on the BDO from that month 5 to month 15. In Oracle, for example, they used to set a rule. I think, Ross, I know your wife works there now, they're probably still there, where no BDOs move to sales for a certain period of time. Now, that is flexible, and there's always going to be an exception to the rule. Language has been a perfect example. Like all being equal, you're better off to have somebody in a sales role than a BDO role. But where possible, you should keep people in a BDO role for a year. Now, on the flip side, if somebody's in a BDO role for 18 months and onwards, then there's possibly a time where you need to sit down with them and have a conversation. With the exception of maybe not being any roles in sales, usually if somebody's in a BDO role for 18 months, their performance may start to dip off, and they may need to look at another role, such as ops, or marketing or something like that, it can be damaging. BDR is not really a role that you can do for 2, 3, 4 years. So it's about bringing somebody in who has that knowledge, who knows about that data, and being able to have that rule that you need to hold those people in BDR as long as possible, as I said, with the odd exception. And the exceptions I came across might be somebody who speaks Swedish or German or the Nordics or the Dutch languages, which I know sometimes can be hard to find. But
Sure.
knowing the BDR business and knowing that you don't get that return on investment until month 4 or 5, and that you need to hold them there to really have the business benefit is absolutely key.
Have you found resistance at the big table at an executive level, say on the senior management team or the senior leadership team? Not everybody subscribes or buys into the concept that this is potentially, if you're building an SDR or an outbound program, that it's a 2-year investment. You're not going to see results after 4 months or 5 months or whatever. That there's an impatience for high growth companies to kind of get these guys flying through the organization in lightning quick speed, and they don't have the patience to know that there's a massive investment here before you actually get this running smoothly.
Yeah, the key here is balance, right? So one of the most contentious issues around BDR is how you target them. And essentially there's 3 ways to target them. You can target them on quantity. So I want you to create X amount of leads each month and that's it. Or does targeting on quality? Or the balance is targeting on a weighting of the 2. So just very quickly give an example. First year managing BDR in Oracle, they wanted my team to create 90 million in pipe, and they wanted us to close, and they wanted 10 million of revenue to respond from that. We created exactly 90 million in pipe, and sales closed 2 million in revenue. So the next year I said to them, if you decrease my pipe generation to 50 million, I think we'll close somewhere between 15 and 20 million. And we closed 23 million. And what happened was there was not such a focus on the quantity of opportunities to be created by the guys, which gave them time to nurture and take stuff a little bit further through the sales cycle before they handed it to the sales team. Furthermore, sales had become disillusioned with the pipe that we were giving them in year 1, and they stopped paying attention to it anyway. So that balance of quantity and quality is key. Now, also, I will say that when you set rules, you need to be they need to be guidelines, not given rules. And here's another quick example. I hired a guy, US guy, spoke Spanish, spoke Swedish. He came in to do the Swedish market as a BDR. 2 months into it, it was pretty obvious to me that he was better than the field sales guy who was probably on 10 times his salary. The guy himself was struggling financially. He'd mistimed how much it was going to cost for him to manage his family in Ireland. And I went to the business and said, this guy needs to move to sales. There's roles there. He's exceptional. And they didn't do it. They wouldn't do it. They left him there. And this was a guy who was really struggling. He, for example, he couldn't go for a beer 3 days after payday. This is how much he was financially struggling. So long story short, he left. He went to LinkedIn. He left Oracle. He went to LinkedIn. Within a year and a half in LinkedIn, he was he stood up on the stage, because I was in LinkedIn at the stage, and he was the global #1 sales rep. So
that's a brilliant story, and I tell you, it reminds me of a conversation I had with Fergus Gloucester, who was one of the original kind of CEOs or managing directors of Salesforce, and then Marketo, And I was having a discussion around market entry strategies for the Nordics, and I think this points to those guys had proved that you can sell software over the phone, into these countries without a boots on the ground kind of presence. But not only that. I was tackling the subject on the market entry around how important is language, right? How important is language when you're connecting into a market? And he said to me, you know what? Not that important. Maybe in certain countries, but in the Nordics, he says, my best sales guy, who is 87% ahead of all of the other folks, that I have, is from Waterford.
Yeah.
And again, to your point, your guy is there. And, if somebody, as Ross alluded to earlier on the call, if somebody has that approach and discipline and organization and work ethic, right, to get stuff done, then you know what, they can absolutely create their own luck. And more importantly, they can recognize and they're ready for luck if it passes their door.
Yeah, I agree on the language thing. And I'll tell you from experience, I find that Dutch Benelux people all speak English. Germans all speak English. Nordics all do English. The countries I found the most difficult were actually the Southern Europe, which was France, Italy, Spain, specifically France. So I have only one French speaker in the company at the moment, and I'm driven mad because she's been pulled left, right, and center to help out on other calls on it. But the good news for recruiters or for companies coming into Ireland is that French speakers, Spanish speakers, and Italian speakers are the easiest to find in Ireland. Because what you find with the Nordics countries and Benelux and Germany, they don't view sales as such a high-end role. They're very much into their children being engineers, being doctors, being that sense of it. So, and their economies and their country are doing much better, so fewer people leave them. While with France and Germany and France and Italy and Spain, there's a lot of salespeople from them in and around Europe. So my advice to companies coming in is, yes, by all means, look for people in the Northern and Central Europe for that specific language on it. But don't be afraid to put an English speaker in there on it. And don't be worried about the Southern Europe, because there's plenty of people to recruit there on it.
So I think that's a very valid point, and that's definitely echoing the experience that I've had in terms of hiring for languages. So the reason that the Nordics and the Benelux countries speak English so readily is because their media is in English. So if you go to the cinema or you go to buy a newspaper, etc., your media that comes from abroad is in English. So they're slightly accented, but their grammar is perfect. Whereas if you look at countries like particularly Germany and France, we mentioned there as well, English is learned much later in the school curriculum. You're an awful lot later into your academic study before you're learning English. And you're learning it as an academic subject. You're not learning it as a language that you would speak and consume and are exposed to. The other point I'd make as well, just specifically in relation to Germany or the DACH region, is that the Germans all do speak English. Yes, that's true. However, I've statistically run the numbers on this, and I've looked at people selling English into Germany versus Germans selling into Germany, and the numbers convert better. So the Germans are actually okay with speaking English, but they prefer to be sold to in their own language. Have you kind of come across that, Alan? And maybe you could take us through, sort of the revenue splits you've come across in different countries, and why certain countries are more significant than others. You talked about economies as well and being more developed. What does that kind of revenue split look like across EMEA to you?
So let me talk about what it will be like to a company, say, coming into Ireland and using Ireland as its hub and the advantages of that and trying to break into the European market. So as well as the tax thing, which I'm not qualified to talk about, but obviously I understand a bit on, obviously the languages and the people in Ireland is really key, and the skills. The key I find is that everybody starts with the UK market. Okay, you've got to understand the UK's got 60 million people, Ireland's got 5 million. So everyone starts with the UK market. They can do the Ireland market bit as well, but UK being 12 times bigger. Mm-hmm. The key for me is that everything is about hiring. Honestly, you can talk about your sales strategies. You can talk about anything as well. Hiring the right people is key, and coming into somewhere like Ireland and being able to put your finger on somebody like you, Ross, who knows the talent, or at least if you come across somebody, you know somebody that knows them. And it's hard for people outside of Ireland to understand just how small Ireland is. Everybody knows everybody. So there is pretty much no candidate you can put in front of me that's worked in IT in Dublin that either me or Ross couldn't find out within a half an hour everything we need to know about that person from people whose opinions are absolutely trustworthy and discreet. And talent is key. So coming into Ireland, the key for me, what I will be looking to do is you're hiring 2 or 3 people to start off in the UK. And if you could even... The skill there is to hire one of them. Maybe in an ideal world, it would be great if you could hire 3 people with perfect English, but one of them also speaks French, one of them also speaks Italian and a bit of Spanish, and one of them also speaks German. All of a sudden, you're maximizing your spread, but you're minimizing your costs and your risk. All right, and you've got those 3 people. They're purely focused on the UK, but they can be throwing an eye in those other countries as well. And you can be testing your BDR and testing your marketing in those countries. And if stuff comes in, at least you know that you've got the ability to respond to it.
And it sounds like you can backfill then in the UK and then reallocate those folks as they grow as they tip their toe in the water in the other territories. Then you can you've more ability to move pieces around the board by the sounds of things.
Exactly. And look, a lot of European people come to Dublin for a job. Their goal is to come to Ireland, do 2, 3, 4 years inside sales, move back to their own country as the field salesperson, and they're back home to their family. Now, a lot of them, that doesn't necessarily happen. They meet someone Irish. They realize Ireland's a great place to live. They can handle the cold weather and they stay. But that is what a lot of people come with that mindset on it. But your point, yeah, it's having flexibility. So to give an example, I remember putting a candidate in front of Ross recently and saying, this guy has the best Irish accent you're ever going to need. He's from Ireland. So people in the UK will love speaking to him. People in Ireland love speaking to him. But you know what? He spent 20 years in Germany. There's a guy, an absolute gem for somebody to hire who can cover 3 markets for you perfectly, and that's it. And other than that, the only nuance of recruitment is around Austria, Switzerland, France. There's a nuance around the languages down there. But to be honest, you'd want to have done very well everywhere else before you're focusing on those areas. I think it's French, Swiss, or something like that. There's a little bit of a nuance there, but I wouldn't be worried about that. You'd be a company 20 years into it before you start really focusing and worrying on that side of it. But that's the key. You get the people, but you got to get the right people. I mean, in LinkedIn, for example, an average hire for me would do $250,000 a year. A top class rep was doing $1 million. And that tiny difference is huge. And knowing and being able to find those people for a company coming into Ireland, they want to be hiring someone who can go, I'm going to bring in 4 top class people. And we may have to pay a little more, but these guys can sell. If you guys don't even have a great process, or your CRM isn't brilliant, or we need to do work on data, if you get these guys leads, these guys will sell if your product covers companies' pain points.
So, Alan, let's dive into that, because I think that's a really valid point. And I know you were my first line manager when I started in Dell, albeit what was kind of nuanced about Dell was you didn't interview me, you weren't part of the interview process. I was allocated to your team as such right out of training. But I suppose as you moved on in your career, I would imagine you were a vital component of the hiring process. And even when your skip line manager is involved in the process, I think you hire better as well. So maybe talk to me about the interview process, and then also what is it that makes that little tiny difference that goes from $250,000 to $1 million yield? Like what do you sniff out in the early stages of that process, and what made the difference? When you see a guy on your team and go, that guy's going to be a rock star, why?
Well, first things first, right? Interviews are risk assessments. Okay, you're assessing how high the risk is that this person's not going to work. Right? And you've got to understand that interviewing is a flawed process. Okay, I have friends, career sales reps, who could come in and interview and look amazing for everyone, but no one's going to know that these guys just don't have the heart for it. Will go missing after a couple of weeks or months or whatever or whatnot. You're not really going to know that through an interview process. So getting information on somebody is key. And that's my opinion, right? Being able to find out that is absolutely key on it. And obviously, you have to be careful how you do that. You have to be careful how you go about it. You have to be discreet, and you have to ensure that your network are discreet as well. So quite often, people have reached out to me in the past and asked me about a rep who works for one of my peers. And I would they know that I would not say anything, because that person's not going to want to know that they may be looking at other roles. The other point after that is actually a process that I've stuck to for a long time. And you can look it up online, and it's what I actually show. And I've even print off posters and have it for my team as well. And it's 10 things that require zero talent. Being on time, having a good work ethic, making the effort, body language, energy, attitude, passion, be coachable, do extra, and being prepared. And I constantly talk to my team about this and ask them, can they look at those 10 things and can they do better on it? And for me, it's a huge thing that has helped even me out as a leader. Everybody who moves up through the ranks as a leader suffers from somewhat of imposter syndrome. And do I deserve this role? Should I be in this role? Well, for me, I look at those things and I go, if I am doing those 10 things, well, then I'm at least going to be putting my absolute best foot forward. And that's what I ask of my team on it as well.
So how do you spot the lack of those things, in the interview process? So, for example, coachability, right? I mean, how are you figuring out whether somebody might be coachable or not? Because I subscribe to the kind of theory, right, that we all we certainly all make bad hires, right? But the only thing worse than making a bad hire is holding on to a bad hire, right? So, in terms of the kind of all of those 10 items, right? What do you do, right, to kind of spot coachability, for example, in the process?
So I think being able to ask really intelligent questions, having the questions set out before. Don't assume I've been interviewing for years, I can go in and ask any questions. Have the questions set out before, but also watch for the answer. Is the answer an example, or is an answer of, well, if that was the case, I would do this, which basically means that they've never done it. Look for examples as much as possible on it, and look to verify those examples. So you talk about something. Give me a time where you were underperforming and you improved. I did this, and this was the situation. Okay, and is that example you gave me, is that something I can ask one of your references with? Is that your manager at the home? Like, really, don't be afraid to put the person on the line on the questioning on it, all right? And I think that's key. But also, I think you can overthink it as well. If you ask really, really good questions, you really drill into the points on it. If you do your homework on the person where possible, because I don't think reference checks really work, because everyone's just going to find 3 people who are going to say good things about them. I don't know how much you can land behind reference checks.
I agree. I completely agree with that.
And the last thing I think as well is listen to your gut. Okay, your gut instinct is made up of thousands of little pieces of data. When you feel that you're out on a night and, this doesn't feel right, that's your gut instinct telling you 40 or 50 things inside 1 second. You're alone. There's 3 people behind you. There's 2 people in front of you. It's the same with people that are working for you. How they turn up for the interview, how they're dressed, how they greet you, how they respond, how they sit. Do they actually put their hand up and say, actually, you know what? I don't know the answer to that question. Sometimes saying that rather than somebody giving you a made up answer, it tells you a lot more about that person. Now, your other point you made to me there about holding on to a bad hire, this is really important for companies coming into Ireland. So very quickly, there's 3 laws in Ireland: constructive dismissal, unfair dismissal, and discrimination. Constructive dismissal is that you were let go unfairly. That's unfair dismissal is that you're let go unfairly. Constructive dismissal is that I felt I had no choice but to leave. And discrimination is 8 factors. I'll come to discrimination in a second. Constructive dismissal and unfair dismissal only kick in after an employee has been employed for a year. Okay, now there's some grey areas, but pretty much only after they've been employed for a year. Every person who starts in a role in Ireland is on mostly a 6-month probationary period. And this makes it very much in the favour of the company. So essentially, in that first 6 months, at any stage whatsoever, with no warning and no information whatsoever, you can actually let somebody go. So you can just say, listen, unfortunately, we've decided this isn't working for us. The legal response is actually, the less you say, the better. And you can just let somebody go with 2 weeks' notice on it. Once you're not seen to be discriminating against them, which is age, sex, race, religion, member of the traveling community, disability, being a mother, and I think there's one other there. But the key going back to it, the legal thing is just a background for you, but the key going back to it is this. For me, sometimes at 6 months, it's not long enough to decide if you've made your mind up on someone. But 9 months is. So a lot of people... But
you can extend the probationary period then, right?
For example, in LinkedIn, for example, I would say they extended maybe 50. At the 6 month mark, they probably maybe let 10 10% or maybe 5 or 10% go, and they might have extended 50% and the rest they would have signed off. Now, the key is the 50%, you extend them to 9 months and you don't necessarily go past 9 months because you're getting too close to the 12. At the 9-month mark, this is really key, and it's where a company should help out an inexperienced manager. If you've doubts at 9 months, let them go. Because for me, and I can tell you time and time and time again, when I didn't listen to my gut or something was 50-50 and I didn't listen to it, it came back to bite me. Because once an employee is a permanent employee, it's actually quite difficult to let them go.
Now, are they safe after that period, Alan? I suppose if they're signed off after 6 or 9 months, does that supersede the 1 year piece, or how does that work?
It's a little bit grey, Ross, to be honest. Okay, so essentially, when you're permanent, you do get some laws on it. But what happens on the constructive or the unfair dismissal? That goes to the Labour Relations Commission. Once they look at it and they decide that there's a case, essentially what happens is the company is almost considered to be guilty and has to prove themselves wrong. So we did follow due process. We did have a hearing. We did follow up with email. We did provide coaching. We did do everything. You literally have to do everything perfectly when there, which actually means that managers' time, like 50-60% of the managers' time can be taken up with that 10 or 20% of their bottom staff. When in actuality, you want your manager, who was previously, like I would have been in Dell, the best sales rep, you want them on the phone closing deals with your guys and coaching them. You don't want them managing people who don't deserve to be in the company or in the wrong role or are just holding on to it for a job on it. That's why managing that 6-month probation and then looking at it again at 9 months, because we're not at a place where you can't get staff. There's staff out there and there's other people out there. If at 9 months, you know, my thing, I've mentored a couple of managers, I always say, sometimes 6 months isn't enough, but 9 months absolutely is. And make your decision. And if you're in doubt, let them go. Sorry.
So I've said on this show before, right, that, you know, in my view, right, the frontline sales manager's job is one of the toughest jobs in a software organization. Would you agree or disagree with that?
It is extreme. I mean, even in my current role here now, it is extremely tough because there's so much expected of them. And like, for example, yesterday, my CEO said, he basically said to the managers, I don't understand what you're doing all day. What are you guys doing? You hear that quite a lot. What are you doing? What are you doing from 9 to 5? I don't know what you're doing. Why aren't you on phone with reps and stuff all day? And it's that helicopter view where people don't understand what involves in the day-to-day running of a team and how a manager needs to do a lot of other things. That being said, I spoke with some of the frontline managers yesterday myself, and I said to them, sit down, look at your calendar, look at your days, try and pull yourself out of the weeds a bit and do things that are going to move rocks, move boulders for the team. Do things, find time to coach, find time to get on calls. Don't be afraid to say no to things that are not adding. If you're not adding to increased pipeline, increased skill set, increased revenue, well, then you really have to question why you do.
Yeah, because the good ones are always lobbying, right, for initiatives, right? They're always lobbying for, you know, either kind of technology improvements. They're always lobbying on how can I make it easier, right, for guys on my team to rock in on a Monday morning, right, and be able to open up, you know, the tools that they're using to say, hey, here's where I'm going to spend my time because the data is informing me, right, that these are the absolute best 10 opportunities to start with. You know? I think a lot of organizations struggle with that. I think the good sales managers can kind of, you know, manually help based on their own experience, right, around what to do, but not necessarily everybody likes to work the way that their manager tells them that they should work, right? So the data, and back to the data, and I'm curious about this, right? You started talking about kind of SDRs and BDRs, and in the Oracle days, you know, you had initially a pipeline number of like, 90 million, and then they dropped that to 50 million because you didn't want the focus to be there. You know, my view is that the pipeline numbers really aren't a great indicator, right, of kind of what you're going to do, right? So in terms of the main KPIs, right, for BDRs or development guys, kind of what are the leading indicators in terms of activity that you look at that you can kind of, in a predictable manner, you can say, well, you know what, based if we hit this number, that number, or of X, right, that I know I'm going to be in a good shape, right, in terms of my forecast, etc., of amount of opportunities generated or whatever. What are the main KPIs in terms of leading indicators for activity that do you feel are the most important in the BDO or kind of SDO role?
It's quite a contentious issue still. I mean, you have some people who are just like 80 calls a day, and then you have other people who are very into social and into that.
It could be 80 shit calls though, right? Or it could be just 80 dials
and that's it. And this is where new technology has come in to help this out. And this is probably even a little since you stepped away from the Quark world in that sense, Ross, in that there's things now where we have what's known as sales cadences. So, where you would get a lead into the system and you would have a specific cadence where it might be call on day 1, socially connect on day 3, socially email on day 5, call on day 6, email again on day 7. That sort of a concept, going through a process with them, right? I know for a fact, and this is what I talk to my team about, if people are reaching out to me trying to sell me stuff. So, for example, a common thing reaching out to me would be recruitment agencies trying to ask will we use their services. I'm usually so busy that I may actually ignore email 1 and email 2, right? If they're good emails, and good emails you need to be very specific about, it needs to fit on a phone screen. There need to be why am I calling you? What's in it for you? And a call to action. Those 3 headings, for example. If it's good emails, I will actually come back to them on the 3rd mail. And it could be something along the lines of, look, guys, I'm sorry, we can't use agencies for the moment, or we're very much involved with one agency, but you know what? It might change in 2 months. Give me a shout back, or I'll retain your number and I'll give you a call back on it that way. At least you will go back to them on it. And that's where it does weigh in behind. You've got to contact people smartly and in a couple of ways on it. So there is particular ways of doing it. I think the key, though, is quality, not just quantity. Okay. And for example, I've really struggled in my current role at times. Me and my CEO, we kind of clash heads a bit on it, where he's looking at the calls that, for example, our BDRs are doing. And I'm saying, but should you not start by looking at how much pipeline they're generating? Because you look at the pipeline they're generating. If they're not generating pipeline, then you look at the activities. But if they're generating the pipeline, you shouldn't really care to look at their activities unless you're looking to best practice share.
I remember well when I was in Dell on your team, Alan, I think that was the mantra we had of the day. And the big thing back then was 2 hours of talk time, if you probably remember. And but it was a secondary thing, right? And you had always said, when you're closing business, nobody cares about this. But if you are not closing business, I will fight tooth and nail for you if your activities are up. However, guys, you've got to give yourself a fighting chance. If you don't have it, we've nothing to lean on. Would you still share that experience, be it in different mediums today?
I've got 4 guys' jobs on the line, Ross, and I said exactly the same to them. Exactly this week, exactly the same to them. I said, look, if your activities are right, I will fight to keep you in this role. If your activities aren't, especially during these times of people working remotely and having to justify what they're doing, there's nothing I can do for you. I said, it's like you're asking me to run a race for you, and when your activities are poor, you've just tied my laces together. I've got no chance for you.
But surely the main kind of indicator is kind of, appointment set, right? Meeting set, or, opportunities at least, right? Kind of, qualified opportunities from BDRs or SDRs. Surely that's the main metric, right? Because if you look at your ideal customer profile and the markets, and actually I'd like to get into the markets, like how do you know what markets to go after and all that kind of stuff. But look, let's say you know exactly, right, the type of profile of people that you're going after, right? Well then, you have an average order value. You're going to assume, right, that they're relatively qualified. But in my experience, pipeline as an indicator, the problem there is that you're asking people at the start of the sales process, right, to qualify a ticket value, right, or a number on an opportunity that hasn't been really qualified that well, And what happens then is that, I could estimate that because the company size is this and this and this, it's a $100,000 deal, or it's a $200,000 deal, or it's a $50,000 deal, or whatever, right? Based on other metrics, but that's not necessarily accurate, right? That fluctuates up and down. But surely the metric has to be, my primary role, right, as a sales development guy or business development guy, is to get people to agree to a meeting for a discovery call.
Well, what I would say there is the reps will do what they're compensated to do.
Right.
So if you say to somebody, and my wife is the director of business development in Oracle, as I said, and you say, go and develop X in pipeline, or go and have this many calls, or do this many things, and their compensation, their variable compensation is 100% geared towards that, they'll go and do that. Now, they might be rubbish, but they'll do that. Whereas I think from our earlier part of the call, where you're counterbalancing that against the level of revenue that closes, or the level of qualification, etc., then I think you've kind of got a balance there across the board. I would definitely not say that opportunities are qualified because a rep's gone through them. They need to be validated by sales. And secondly, you need to have sales on board that they're going to validate. And that BDR, in fact, is going to the sales rep and having a sit-down discussion about what their expectations are on both sides of the fence.
So that's the point. So it's the percentage of conversion, right, of opportunities from the BDR team thrown over the wall, right, to sales. And then when sales accept them, it's like, for me, that needs to be in the 90 percentiles. What's your experience, Alan, with that?
Point is, both your points are absolutely spot on, but all bets are off at the moment. Just with what's going on with the pandemic and stuff like that on it, okay? And what I find at the moment is that it's important to keep the activities right on it, but measuring people off revenue is kind of off the table at the moment on it. Even
a great time to be in, I suppose, in a lot of ways.
I don't think it's measuring people on revenue. I think it should be paying people on revenue.
Fair.
Which is a big difference, right? So it's like...
But how do you pay them in the current climate? Because activities are up because people are working from home. You don't have folks coming over to your desk annoying you. If you have children, that's a different ballgame.
No, well, like, this is an anomaly, right? So obviously all the good companies, all the good sales leaders are pivoting here, right? And they're saying, okay, we need to recalibrate, right? We need to look at the core metrics that are going to be important to our business in the future, right? When we come out of this recession, what are the most important things to us when we come out of this? Well, I tell you what the most important things are, right? Is opening up conversations with people that don't know us from a hole in the head.
Fair enough.
And I agree. I think that's the standard. And I think your very big companies have that luxury. Some of the big companies are guaranteeing their staff 50% commission and stuff like that. And some others are giving people a pay cut. So, But I think one thing I've learned about leadership in this time is leadership is not about how you lead when everything's going great. It's how you lead when things are tough. I constantly use the example of a friend of mine who's a professional footballer. If his team were winning 4-0, he'd score 2 goals. If his team were 1-1 and they really needed him, he'd get 2 yellow cards. So in actuality, he wasn't that good to the team because he wasn't good when it really mattered to the team. And it's the same with leadership. When times are really, really tough as a leader, first thing you do, check in, is everybody okay? Are you okay? I have a rep working for me, and I didn't realize until I checked in on them. They've been on their own in an apartment for 3 weeks. Haven't spoke to anyone. Right? All they do is on the phone. Check in. Are you okay? Next thing is simplify what's expected for them. Simplify things down. So in this sense, it's here's the quantity of activities I expect you to do. Here's the quality that I expect within that quantity. And here is the output, be it pipeline generated for BDRs, or be it sales or versus target for reps on it. Keep it simple, keep it focused, be consistent, and ask everybody to work hard. Don't forget your 10 things that take no talent. And keep talking about that with them on it. That's the key that will get you through in that sense on it. It's hard for leaders not to panic, but that's the key to get them through on it.
Yeah, I like to supply the why too. It's like, here's why you're doing it, right? Yeah. Like, you're doing it because, right? Well, obviously it's your job, right? But apart from that, right, there always has to be the kind of the real fire, right? To say that, well, if that happens, right, and you do, kind of what's expected and what I'm saying here, right? Here is how we're going to look, right? in 3 months time or 6 months time or whatever. Quick question. Have you found, right, in the SDR BDR approach, right, you talked about cadence, and I subscribe to that I think it's extremely important, right, because people just dismiss, right, or disregard potential leads, right, that are very, very hard to come by. I always, in every organization I have worked in or worked for, or I always have a huge sign on the wall that says "Love every lead." Okay, so it's really important, right, that all of the dollars that are gone into kind of inbound, outbound, kind of corporate marketing, advertising, events, right, that they're followed through really, really ruthlessly, right, and vigorously, right, to make sure that we get to a situation where we say, hey, there's definitely no fit here, right? They look like a customer that should do business with us and have our stuff, but the timing is off or whatever, right? So, I mean, I try and inculcate that in every organization. But in terms of the medium, so your cadence is email, maybe I'll hit them up on LinkedIn, maybe I'll call them. Are you seeing, or are you trying, right, any new mediums like, video or anything like that? I'd imagine in your current role, because your stuff is so slick, right, with, the all of the content piece, right? Are you utilizing or showing people kind of any of your content in a really cool way that allows them to interact with it or catches their eye more than just a regular email? Can you talk to kind of any new mediums that are maybe working?
There's a couple of points there. And before I come to that, the first point I would say to you is that I think one of the best things an organization can do is stop the poor marriage that is marketing and sales. Sales assume that marketing are just trying to attach themselves to any bit of revenue they can. And marketing assuming that sales aren't bothered following up on their leads. If you can bring that together, and by the way, both are correct. Sales reps don't follow up as much as they should, and marketing do try and catch themselves attached to stuff. So both that can be correct, and in an environment where there's a lot of pressure, that can actually be forced to be worse on it. So a company that can marry those two things together is key. So giving sales the ability to give feedback or disqualify leads, but measuring that and using a good CRM system to measure, this is not a proper lead because, and you have a drop-down menu and you give a comment. That sense is key on it. Also, holding sales accountable for actually, you know what, marketing went and got this lead. Each lead costs $100. You're going to make it 10 attempts to call them, and that's it. And if you're not doing it, well, then unfortunately, if you're not doing it consistently, well, then unfortunately, this might not be the right company for you to work in. Very, very specific on it. With regard to technology, I think the best thing a company can do in order to sell their product is to show another company how they use their own product really well. So to give you an example, in LinkedIn, when I would go and pitch to customers, and I would be pitching with a top-class sales rep I would talk about how I recruited that person myself, what I did, how I found them, how I nurtured them, how I reached out to them, how I shared contact with them, that sort of sense on it. And if you can show that you're using your own product really well, then that is probably the number one way to sell to people.
I love that. I think that's great advice. Kind of we're kind of drinking our own champagne over here, or kind of getting high off our own supply. I think it's great.
Yeah. If you're not using your own product, how can you convince somebody else to use it? And I think with regard to the technology, I do think video work. With Quark, our technology actually has a good advantage to it in that when we share, our technology links in with Salesforce. So, for example, if you're a sales company and you're selling and you've got opportunities and you want to keep an opportunity warm, our product links into Salesforce and it suggests content to send to that customer. So it won't suggest content they've already seen. It'll suggest relevant content, and that content may be a video or an article. When you send that to the customer, that article clicks, their clicks and their response on that article gives us a score back, and tells us what they did with that article. Did they delete it? Did they watch it? Did they linger specifically on one area? Same with proposals.
It sounds like a great tool for customer success more so than sales.
Yeah, it's a great tool for both. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I'm trying to get my sales team to do better, is to show them, like, you know, instead of going in and making assumptions that they know everything about that customer, and say, look, I don't know everything that's going on with you. Yes, I've asked you questions, I went through things, but let me just show you a few things that based off your pain points, what we do to solve those pain points for us. And then you get the question, well, can you specify this for this? Can you do this with this? And once they start asking those questions, then you're halfway there.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's showing the key levels of engagement, etc. So, look, Alan, as we wrap up here, I think you've been really insightful in sharing some great leadership advice, and the sort of been there, done that mantra, open to new things, etc. You've embraced that. I suppose just to come back to Ireland as a platform, what I like to normally ask guests is, you know, how would you define the crack? What is it about us that makes us a bit different as a nation and as a platform? And like, what would you say has kind of been your experience in that regard, and how would you describe our humor, as it were?
Selling is storytelling, and nobody tells stories like Irish people. I think that's probably a big point that you'll find on it. It's probably a big thing why Irish people are so popular and so well liked around the world. They tell great stories. The story probably gets different or better or bigger every time they tell it. But I think that's a big thing on it. Irish people are extremely robust, or they have huge bounce back ability. You know, we go through a recession every 20 or 30 years because we're constantly living outside of our means, and we have that fight and that ability to come back. And I think it's a massively underestimated view on it. I mean, when you think of sales is essentially going out there and getting as many no's as you can in order to decipher them out from the customers that are potentially yes, and turning them into yeses. And I think Irish people are very good at that sense on it. Obviously, it's a hub for people in and around Europe, and on a wider financial sense, there's an advantage to us that way. But I think even that aside, I think Irish people it is a good place to start for around Europe. I mean, generally speaking, there's not a nation that doesn't have an issue with hearing from somebody who is Irish or with an Irish accent, while other people can react to it differently. And I think as well, the people here, and if you get the right leadership in, and the people who don't consider themselves the finished article, who have had tough times, who have gone in and failed in organizations and have known how to fail and learn and do better, I think that's a key. And I think looking for somebody, I know I've learned more in my to be perfect, give you a perfect example, I didn't learn a massive, amazing amount in LinkedIn because everything was so perfect. The sales process wasn't broken. The product was amazing. It was easy to demo. Everybody wanted to work for us. The benefits were amazing. I didn't learn a massive amount. When you go to somewhere that's been really tough, and maybe even it hasn't even succeeded on it, you still learn a massive amount more about you. And even asking somebody that question, what have you learned about yourself in tough situations? And I think something like that, asking those questions, is another way to eliminate the potential errors on people like hire.
That's a great point. No, key insight. Really appreciate that. Well, look, thank you very much for your time today, Alan. It's been great to speak with you and go through some of those learnings. And we look forward to having you on the show in the future.
No problem, guys. Take care, all right?
You've been listening to the Global Tech Leaders Podcast, designed for both established and aspiring career-focused tech rock stars, as well as helping leadership figure out how to speak global in today's multicultural world. For further details, check out sf-talent.com.